The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Marcus Chen stared at his computer screen, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. It was 4:47 p.m. on a Friday, and his heart was already racing. In 13 minutes, he would have to do something he'd been dreading all week: ask his boss for permission to leave early. Again, Marcus wasn't the type to rock the boat. At 34, he'd learned that keeping your head down and working hard was the safest path forward, especially as a single father with a 7-year-old daughter depending on him. But today was different. Today, he had a date. His boss, Patricia Winters, sat in her corner office with glass walls that allowed her to survey her kingdom of cubicles like a hawk watching field mice. She was brilliant, demanding, and utterly devoted to the company. She was also single, childless by choice, and had made it abundantly clear that she expected the same level of dedication from her team that she gave herself. Personal lives, in her view, were something you managed around work, not the other way around. Marcus had been working under Patricia for 2 years, and in that time, he'd watched 3 colleagues leave because they couldn't maintain her pace. He'd stayed because he needed the health insurance, the steady paycheck, and the promise of stability for his daughter, Lily. But it had come at a cost. Soccer games missed. Parent-teacher conferences attended via phone from his car in the parking lot. Bedtime stories replaced with rushed goodnight kisses as Lily was already half asleep. The divorce had been finalized 18 months ago. Marcus's ex-wife, Sarah, had moved across the country for a job opportunity, leaving him with primary custody and a tangle of emotions he still hadn't fully processed. He'd thrown himself into work, partly because he had to and partly because it was easier than facing the loneliness that waited for him in the quiet moments. Then he'd met Jennifer. She was Lily's art teacher, and she had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. They'd started talking at a school fundraiser 3 months ago, and something had shifted in Marcus's chest, a feeling he thought he'd forgotten how to feel. She'd asked him to coffee twice, and both times he'd had to cancel because of work emergencies. This dinner was his 3rd chance, possibly his last, and he wasn't going to blow it. At 4:55 p.m., Marcus stood up, smoothed his tie, and walked toward Patricia's office. His palms were sweating. She looked up as he knocked on her glass door, her expression already impatient. "Yes, Patricia, I need to leave early today. I have a date." The words tumbled out before he could overthink them. He'd rehearsed a dozen different approaches, mentioning his daughter, talking about work-life balance, even fabricating a doctor's appointment, but in the end, he'd chosen honesty. Maybe it was Jennifer's influence. She'd told him during one of their brief conversations that authenticity was underrated. Patricia's pen stopped mid-signature. She looked up at him, her face completely still, and the silence stretched between them like a tightrope. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. He could hear the hum of someone's computer 3 cubicles away. He could hear everything except the response he desperately needed. "A date," Patricia finally said, her voice flat and unreadable. "Yes, I know it's last minute, and I apologize, but..." "Sit down, Marcus." His stomach dropped. This was it. He was going to get the lecture about commitment, about team players, about how everyone has personal lives but we all make sacrifices. He'd heard her give versions of this speech to others. He sat in the chair across from her desk, preparing for the worst. Patricia set down her pen and folded her hands on her desk. For a long moment, she just looked at him, and Marcus noticed something he'd never seen before: she looked tired. Not just end-of-the-week tired, but soul-deep exhausted. "How long has it been since you've been on a date?" she asked quietly. Marcus blinked, caught off guard. Almost 2 years. Since before my divorce was final." Patricia nodded slowly. She looked past him, out the window toward the parking lot where the evening sun was painting everything gold. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. The corporate armor had cracked, just slightly. "I was engaged once. Did you know that?" Marcus shook his head, speechless. 23 years ago. His name was David. He was patient and funny, and he loved me despite my ambition. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "He asked me to leave work early one Friday. We were supposed to go to his parents' anniversary party. I told him I had a presentation to finish, that we'd catch the next one." "There was always a next one," I said. The office felt very small suddenly. Very quiet. "He died 3 months later. Aneurysm. No warning. He was 31 years old." Patricia's fingers traced the edge of a picture frame on her desk that Marcus had never really looked at before. I think about that Friday a lot. About all the Fridays I chose a presentation over the person I loved. About how I can't remember a single thing that was in that presentation, but I remember exactly what he looked like when I said no. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Patricia looked directly at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Go on your date, Marcus. Leave right now. In fact, I'm making it a rule. You leave at 4:30 every Friday from now on. Spend time with your daughter. Spend time building a life. Because I'm sitting here at 56 years old, and I'm very good at my job, and I'm very, very alone. And no amount of successful quarterly reports has ever made up for what I lost. Patricia, she held up a hand. I've been a terrible boss to you. I know that. I've watched you miss your daughter's events, and I've called you on weekends, and I've made you feel guilty for being human. I did it because it's what I know. But it's wrong. She stood up and extended her hand. Thank you for being brave enough to ask for what you need. I hope she's wonderful, and I hope you have a beautiful evening. Marcus shook her hand, unable to speak past the emotion lodging in his chest. As he turned to leave, Patricia called after him. Marcus, tell me about it on Monday. If you want to. I'd like to hear how it goes. He nodded, and for the first time since he'd started working there, he saw Patricia smile, a real smile, warm and genuine and heartbreakingly sad. Marcus made it to the restaurant 10 minutes early. Jennifer was already there, and when she saw him, her face lit up in a way that made him believe in second chances. They talked for 3 hours. He told her about Lily's obsession with dinosaurs and his terrible cooking skills. She told him about growing up in a big family and her dream of opening her own art studio someday. It was easy and comfortable and filled with laughter. When he got home, Lily was already asleep at his sister's house. He sat in his quiet apartment and thought about Patricia's story, about the fragility of time, about the difference between existing and living. On Monday morning, he arrived to find a note on his desk in Patricia's handwriting. How did it go? He walked to her office and told her everything. She listened like she was starving for the story, for proof that someone had chosen differently than she had. Things changed after that. Patricia started leaving at reasonable hours. She asked about her employees' families. She smiled more. Marcus and Jennifer's relationship grew, and when he introduced her to Patricia at the company holiday party, the older woman hugged Jennifer and whispered, "Take care of him. Life is shorter than we think." Sometimes the smallest acts of courage, admitting you need to leave early, being honest about needing more from life, create ripples that change everything. Marcus had walked into that office expecting judgment and walked out having saved 2 lives, his own and his boss's. Because Patricia started therapy that month, reconnected with old friends, and eventually met someone at a book club she finally had time to attend. The truth neither of them had fully understood until that Friday afternoon was simple but profound. We're all just people trying to navigate the complicated terrain between ambition and connection, between professional success and personal fulfillment. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is choose love over fear, presence over perfection, and living over simply surviving.